try and do so we can help to squish this COVID-19. I'm tired of talking about flattening the curve now. I just want to squish it. And I think most people feel the same way after a month of trying to sort out in our lifestyles and our lives generally, personally and professionally, how to manage this. It's been an interesting time. And it's going to continue to be interesting, I fear, for several months. So I don't think that this is going away anytime really soon. I think we all wish it was, but I don't think it's going to. And I think governments are going to be very challenged to try and help us all get back to some normality in some sort of a staged process that sort of controls what will almost invariably be a second wave or maybe even a third wave of this horrible virus that's plaguing the entire planet. Anyway, for the purposes of today, I want to sort of respond to what have amounted to be hundreds, if not thousands now, of inquiries that we've had from AEF members, from all the other PSO members across the country. We're privileged to be in service to all the PSOs and their various members across the country, with the exception of Quebec. And so we've got this massive community that's been turning to us for guidance, which I'm a little I'm thankful for, but also trying my best to remain neutral in what guidance we do provide as the broker. I'm the partner in charge, as it were, and that email address that Megan gave out earlier is directly to my inbox here on my computer, and I've been answering every single one of them as fast as I can from all corners of the country. And frankly, the questions have been pretty common. At the beginning, it was about, am I covered for everything? And now it's down to, can I ride my horse? Can I do anything that is normal to me as a horse person? So I want to go through some of the things that I can speak to, with the underlying theme at the outset and at the end of this session and throughout the session being something that I'll probably repeat more than I should, but that is, like everyone else on this call and everyone else in the country, we're all taking our lead from government and health officials. I can't tell you whether or not you are going to be subject to penalty from the government if you ride. It's up to government to make that determination. What I do know is that the insurance coverages we provide are very specific to exposures that the insurance companies assessed when we developed these programs back in the 90s. And frankly, those risk assessments really haven't changed. So with that being said, I want to speak to two very separate sections in our work in the community, in the equine community. So the first is the PSO membership, liability insurance and accident insurance, that every member in good standing of the Alberta Equestrian Federation has by virtue of membership. And the reality is that those policies are unaffected by COVID-19. They are not in any way going to be canceled or amended or adjusted to reflect this current situation, which is temporary. Liability insurance is absolute. You own the horse, you lease the horse, you're in control of the horse, whether COVID-19 exists or not. That liability exposure is exactly the same. So the obligation from the insurance company is exactly the same. Should that horse cause bodily injury or property damage to someone else or something else, and you're held to be legally liable for that activity or that damage. And that's an important element. We've had the question a lot about whether or not the personal liability associated with membership is still enforced. And the answer is yes, of course it is, because it's not relevant to COVID. It's relevant to the ownership of the horse. The other included policy is the accident, death, and dismemberment policy, which frankly is again unaffected by COVID. There is no coverage for contraction of a disease in that policy. It was never intended. It's not going to be added. It's intended to provide coverage should the member suffer a catastrophic injury as a result of an interaction with a horse. So it doesn't say interaction with COVID-19, it says interaction with a horse. So again, that is not affected by COVID-19. It's not a consideration. Regrettably, since COVID-19 broke out, as one would expect, just because of the scope of the program, we've had claims under both liability and the AD&D policies from across the country. The reality is the policies are doing exactly what they're intended to do, and they are responding to those claims as they should. So that's not going to change. So that's the easy part, frankly. The personal membership coverages are actually quite simple and quite easy to understand. What isn't so simple is for facility operators who have business operations, have commercial general liability insurance that covers the various operations on their farm. Those folks have a very different challenge because they are being asked to, in some cases, allow people to come to their facility to manage the animals. In other circumstances, being asked to come to their facility to ride. In other circumstances, asking us and others whether or not they can continue with their riding lesson programs and other activities that generate income, needed income at this particular time on the farm, and how to address those things. So again, I say, as I said at the outset, that we're all watching government and health official announcements as they come out, and all of the provinces, including Alberta, are making daily announcements. And I asked Megan and Aaron before this session just to confirm what I think I knew, and I was right, that the province of Alberta has continued in their path at the moment with defining a list of businesses that are considered essential for various reasons to be open, with the understanding that social distancing and other recommendations or requirements as stipulated by government and health authorities are met. And so, in fact, on the essential service business list in Alberta includes the term stables. And I've come to learn quite early on when we saw the list of essential services being told to stay open, not only in Alberta, but frankly in just about every other province across the country. The reference to stables is quite clear in my mind, and not necessarily in the mind of everyone. The reason the government has included the term stables is to recognize that stables are where horses are housed. In exactly the same context as a zoo is a place where exotic animals are housed. In exactly the same context as a kennel or a cattery, where dogs and cats are housed. And because of those housing sort of environments where animals are kept, we as humans have an obligation, both legally and socially, to manage those animals and maintain their health and welfare. And so the reference to stables is not about whether or not you're running a riding lesson program or a trail ride operation or a training facility for horses or a sale barn or any of the number of other things that we do in our farms. It's about recognizing that the horses that are on that farm, in that stable, do require attendance by staff to maintain the health and welfare of them. So that's then sort of is a nice segue into, so what's an operator to do? What's a stable to do in terms of keeping their business open and maintaining some sense of normalcy? And the reality is it's up to the individual operator eventually or ultimately to decide what constitutes the sort of rudimentary and necessary care for the health and welfare of the animal, and how best to achieve that. In some facilities, that means that staff and owners of the facility are the only people that are on site. That is certainly a perfect scenario, I suppose, if we consider what the health and government regulators are advising. It means that the horses are being taken care of to the extent that they can be, which really just includes their housing, their shelter, to maintain basic health, that they're being allowed the opportunity to move about. As grazing animals, they do need to do that, and ultimately are being watched over by us human folk. In other barns, where those facilities are challenged by the number of animals on the property, some operators have chosen to allow some boarders to come to the facility, frankly, to assist in the care for the animals, not necessarily just the boarder's horse, but perhaps to assist the staff and owners of the facilities to provide that care. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this whole notion of stables being open needs very clearly to be focused on the health and welfare of the horse at a very rudimentary level, and not as much concerned about riders or owners of horses' desire to be interacting with their animals on a daily basis or on a regular basis. I am a horseman. I don't own horses now, but I certainly did for many years. And I certainly understand the mental benefits and the physical benefits of being with the horses. However, at this particular time, it's hard for me to rationalize that personal desire to be with the horse as being some sort of overriding authority over a facility manager's desire to protect themselves, their staff, their family from and facilitating people from leaving their homes, which is not what government really wants us to do. So it's a personal decision that the operator has to determine how they're going to manage this new risk that's in front of them. But in a broader sense, those facility operators have always been managers of risk. Those same facility managers have to manage weather risks and other hazards that are on their property at certain times of the year or in certain environments to make a determination whether or not it's a good day or a bad day for boarders to be coming to the barn. It's really no different in this circumstance. It's just a different issue. It's a different risk, and they're learning how to manage it as the time goes on. As far as the insurance component goes, though, and again, I speak back to where we were before, and that is the insurance policies that we provide to facilities as a brokerage through the insuring companies we represent are not directly impacted by the presence of COVID. There's no reference to disease or a pandemic in those policies as being excluded, or environments where these viruses exist as being excluded environments. But the reality is that insurers of all stripes expect all of us as consumers of the product to be acting within the confines of law. And that's a very important sort of element to this discussion, that government has not said you can't ride. I'm suggesting you don't. Lots of people are suggesting you don't for a host of reasons. They haven't said that barns can't be open. In fact, they've said the barns need to be open, but they're doing it in a context that says we really need to be focusing on the welfare of the animal, not worrying about whether or not a rider wants to come because they're bored sitting at home. And I think boarding operators have to sort of identify what their priorities are and then manage the risk appropriately. And as long as they're doing those things within the confines of laws and statutes and regulations that are being, frankly, edited almost on a daily basis, then frankly, their insurance policies are obliged to respond. I think we all agree that riding schools, by their very nature, are not to be run at this time. Having group lessons would just facilitate inevitably the gathering of people from a bunch of different households coming to a common place, which is just not good for anyone at this time. So then we speak about the private lessons and the semi-private lessons. And again, I go back to what I just said, and that is, our coaches really in the business now at this particular moment in time in facilitating the needs of the rider, or are they in the business as professional horsemen and women of identifying what the absolutely minimal needs are for the horse at this particular time, and how to engage, if necessary, the owners of those horses or the students, the riders of these horses. And that, again, is a professional decision that only they can make. I've told the story more than once, but I have owned horses that were, frankly, psychotic enough, I don't know how else to put that you couldn't turn them out. Horses that just were never allowed to be horses as babies, and just were always in a stall environment, and frankly, over time, just became very used to that. So to turn out some of those horses in a paddock to get their exercise would be dangerous as hell for them, and for any horse that might be in their way, because they'd be running blind. Put those horses under tack, and they're pussycats, and wonderful to be around. And so in that environment, I would easily be able to defend my position if I owned that horse today, to say to the boarding place, look, to maintain the health and welfare of my horse, I need to be coming to the barn 3 times a week, and I need to be able to throw my saddle on, go for a ride, even if it's just out for a hack, or in the round pen, or in the sand ring, or in the riding arena by myself for 25 minutes or 45 minutes, so that the horse's brain can be maintained, so the horse's health and welfare can be maintained. I'll take my brushes home, and I'll see my horse the next time. And I'll tell you when I'm coming and when I'm leaving, so that I'm not interacting with people inadvertently at the barn. I deem myself to be an essential care worker for my horse. I would certainly have to agree with that argument, I guess, if I was a facility manager. Other managers are saying, no, that's not acceptable. I'll manage the horse for you. And if that's their deal, that's what they do. But I hope I'm making it clear that there's this huge difference between the riding lesson environment and the type of riding that I've just described as a horse owner. From a coach's perspective, if the coach felt that they needed to supervise me riding my horse because he hadn't been out for a week, as the facility manager, as the coach, and said to me, look, I don't think it's safe for you to be riding on your own. We want this to be a supervised environment always. we're not going to do a lesson today, but I just want to be on the grounds or in the ring to make sure that you're okay. So if you crash and burn, that there's somebody there to deal with it. That's fine. And again, I don't argue the fact that that very well may be a chargeable service for the coach to impose, because I have to have enough respect for that professional to help me make the assessment necessary to keep the horse healthy and well. So that's sort of what that's about. One of the questions that's on the list is about, am I legally liable if someone contracts COVID-19 on my property? I'm going to address that just because it's a question that frankly has come up more than I would have ever expected. And the answer is I can't answer the question. A lawyer's the only one that might be able to answer that truly. I wonder whether or not COVID-19 will have enough of a shadow or a lingering effect on surfaces that someone could actually prove that they contracted COVID-19 at any given place or any given interaction. But nonetheless, I actually do expect over time there will be some assertion or allegations made in the community in general, not necessarily in our industry, where people will say, well, I came to the barn, I came to the food store, I came to wherever. That must be where I got it. Now I'm sick, I'm out of work, or I've lost my job for a period of time, and so I'm holding you legally liable. It's doubtful whether or not insuring companies will be able to respond to that with any truth or any sort of sincerity, and we're all very anxiously watching for that. Anyway, so I've gone on for 20 minutes. I can go on for another hour. Megan won't let me because I see her lit up there. So Megan, back to you.
Yeah, so maybe now will be a great time to, I know Mike addressed a lot in his opening topics there, so thank you, Mike. And for any questions that anyone wants to ask specifically, please begin to utilize the chat function and ask your questions there, and we'll begin to address them. And I'll also begin screen sharing my screen as well with the form I had mentioned earlier, so I'll pull that up right away and you can begin asking your questions.
Well, while we're getting that sorted out, I also want to sort of address too that essential caregivers obviously have to include vets and farriers. Again, I'm quite confident that governments of all stripes recognize that, notwithstanding we've been talking about sort of moving the horses around and doing that and how to manage that, but horses do need veterinarian care from time to time. They do need farrier care from time to time. They might even need a medical therapy provider to come and deal with a certain issue on a horse or with a horse. Obviously, those people do need to have access to the animal to maintain its health and welfare. So it's important for the facility operators to be able to accommodate that where they can or how they can. So
we have our first question. It's from Donna here. It says, if I have strict protocols in place and I suspect some horse owners who are coming to my facility to offer essential care to their horses are not following the protocols, what are my risks and liability? Do I police this or just have protocols in place?
okay, yeah, I think I understand the context of the question, Donna. And what I'm hearing is that some people regrettably are not taking the COVID-19 threat as seriously as others. I would say to you as the facility manager, owner of the property, whatever your status is, that you ultimately have the right to allow or not allow people to enter your premises. And if you feel that a risk is being amplified because people are acting in an irresponsible way, it would certainly be my recommendation to advise them that if they don't want to wash their hands and do the things that you're asking them to do, that they aren't allowed to be on the property. When people pay board to facilities, there's this huge sort of assumption, I suppose, that horse owners, if they pay the boarding facility $500 a month, that they then have rights over entering private property, and they simply don't. They're paying $500 a month for the horse to be housed, fed, and watered, and potentially exercised or allowed to exercise on its own in a field or on the land. I don't think anywhere in many stable agreements it says you're paying me $500 so you can come and be belligerent to me, or you can ride your horse whenever the hell you feel like it, or you can ignore the rules that I have on my property to protect my asset. So if that helps, Donna, I think you have every authority and every reason to exercise authority over your own land.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to actually unmute one of our guests, Susan Newton Waters here, so that she can answer her question. Let me just. Hi, Susan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and proceed with your question, please.
Okay. I know that some stables are allowing boarders to go in and ride, or trainers to go in and ride the horses. And there was some restriction put down, I think, by BFL regarding no jumping. And I just wondered if Mike had an opinion on that, or if he could maybe add something to that. It's hard to tell people they can't jump.
Yeah, I've heard that, Sue, and I'm puzzled by it, to be frank, and I'm not BFL, so I can't speak for them.
Right.
From my perspective as an underwriter, I don't know whether putting a discipline-specific restriction speaks to the bigger context of whether or not the rider should be riding the horse in the first place. Jumper riders will tell you that they can jump really big fences very safely. And so to them, the risk factors are minimal.
Right.
I'm troubled by the context. I think it's more appropriate to be taking a broader view and saying, if I'm going to allow people to ride on my property, if a coach says I'm going to allow students to be in my presence to ride their animals, that again, they're not doing it in a context of saying, we need to keep the horse school. We need to keep them focused at 1.20 meters. We need to keep that horse at a certain fitness level, because surely anytime soon, Spruce Meadows is going to be open again. It's a ludicrous position to be taking. I just don't buy it.
Okay.
And so I'm more of the mind to say, coaches should be turning their attention to the very rudimentary skill sets that they have as professionals to advise their clients, keep your horse healthy and sound. You have a responsibility with this horse, as I do as your pro. So let's find a way to manage the health and welfare of this animal that best suits it, and stop taking the focus and start taking the focus off the rider and putting the focus on the horse. Professional horsemen and women have as much responsibility to do that, in my opinion, than they do chasing a ribbon or chasing performance for the benefit of the rider. So I'm sorry if I sound a little agitated by it, but I take exception to the notion that it's discipline anything.
Okay, so then basically your answer is that if they're going to let people ride, it doesn't really matter what they do, providing they follow the rules.
Well, yeah, but again, Sue, is it about following? What rules? You know, if you guys phoned the minister, if I've actually had a client do this in Alberta, as a matter of fact, and the client phoned the health authority to ask the question, as a professional coach, whether it was acceptable for her to allow her students on her farm so she could teach them a lesson. The health professional, the government official, was smart enough to, I guess, must have a horse background by coincidence, started asking provocative questions about what the coach intended to do. And the coach was quite candid. I actually have the email thread somewhere. She showed it to me, and coach said, "Look, I'm just gonna. These are walk trot kids, or the horse is a show horse, but we're not trying to horse show. So we just want to keep the horse healthy and sound." Health professional said, "Fine." She said, "As long as you're not trying to keep the horse ready for something that isn't going to happen anytime soon, then we have no problem with that."
Right. Okay. Good.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you.
I'm going to mute your line again here. Our other question here is from Jen. She says, what about horse trainers? Should they stop training? I'm seeing people still actively advertising for this service and know of people doing this still. In my opinion, it's not essential. Also, what about Hollands to arenas, indoor and outdoor?
I'm sorry, Megan or Aaron, I lost you near the end there.
That's okay. The second part of the question says also, what about Hollands to arenas, indoor and outdoor?
Okay, so again, I have to say to the pro, if this is about a trainer interacting with a horse and riding the horse for the benefit of training, that's really a business decision that they're making. They're not putting their clients, human clients, at risk. They may be putting themselves at risk and potentially ending up in an environment where they're doing some risky activity that might not be in anyone's interest if they end up in hospital. But again, is it really for the benefit of the horse? Is this about trying to keep a horse on a training schedule? Or is this about just taking care that the animal is being managed minimally to maintain its health and welfare? hauling to an arena, again, out and about. I would imagine that if you asked Premier Kenny or your health official whether or not they thought that was a great idea to be going from here to there for any purpose like this, I'm pretty sure they would say that's a non-essential thing to do. Here in Ontario, which is where I am, in Toronto, yeah, concentration of people, absolutely. 14 million people live within 100 miles of me. I get it. But now government is saying, like, we see you guys standing together in a park. If you're closer than 2 meters, we're handing you a ticket for $1,000. And they handed out, I don't know how many, a bunch of tickets on the weekend, because people just aren't paying attention. But governments are trying to tell us everywhere, stay home. Don't be moving about. That same trainer that's going from here to there is buying gas at a gas station, is buying other supplies, is interacting with people. It's inevitable. So is that in the best interest of everyone around them? I would have to say no. My opinion.
Okay, is there any other questions that anybody on here would like to ask, either on chat, or you can raise your hand there on the side function and we can unmute you. We'll give you a few minutes here. If we don't see anything pop up, Megan will kindly wrap the session up. Okay, so we have a question here from Donna. It says, any suggestions for continued stream of income so that we can meet the essential care of the horses that are in our care?
Yeah, we've had that question way more often than I would have liked. So here's something that I planted in the brain of somebody earlier today, and it's got to be done carefully, Donna. So I'm going to be careful with my words. If you're a coach, a professional in the industry, I did allude to this earlier in the conversation, that a certified coach, or anybody for that matter who's a professional, truly a professional in the industry, can be creative, in my opinion, to find a way to not only maintain relationships with the rider clients, but to also be that true professional that says to the owner of the horses, yeah, you can come to the farm, but I'm going to supervise your ride to make sure you're safe. Is that a chargeable service? I would say it is. It's not a lesson in the traditional sense where we're trying to work towards specific goals, but it's about that interaction. And your supervision, your time, your professional approach to it is certainly a value-add service that does warrant a charge, in my opinion. I've got coaches who are now training athletes, the riders themselves, through video conferencing and telephone conversations to say, yeah, you're right, we're not horse showing now. We may not horse show until the end of the year. Maybe we won't be horse showing at all. However, as your coach, I fully expect you to remain physically fit. And that means following a regime that I can help you establish to maintain your physical health and wellness. And again, that should be a chargeable service. I think coaches have to get outside of this spectrum that they've been caught in up until now in other environments where they're focusing on a specific expected outcome or expected process in their interactions. I think this is happening, frankly, in all kinds of sports. I've seen a number of sort of things on the news wire about coaches who are being very creative with athletes in other sports. Hockey coaches, particularly soccer coaches in other cases, in hopes that these kids and others get back to their sport activity, but are being creative in that interaction through Zoom calling like this, and FaceTiming and Skype and so on. Because in theory, the coach knows what they're supposed to be accomplishing, that they're looking at the well-rounded athlete and making sure that when things do get back to normal, that both horse and rider are well suited at the same level of fitness so that it's a safe environment. I think that's a very real responsibility that all coaches have, and there are ways that they can maintain that. In the short term, having school horses, I appreciate the challenges that many barns are facing, that their incomes are very specific and are very scheduled, and that income has been interrupted. And I don't have a firm answer. I don't have an epiphany on that, I'm afraid. It's about being creative as best you can.
Our next question is from Jen. I'm actually going to unmute her line so that she can clarify her question here. So, hi Jen, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please proceed with your question.
Okay, so I know in places like Spain and such, they've actually said that you can't ride at all And I know some people over there that are doing like in-hand work and stuff. What are your thoughts on stuff happening along those lines here? Do you think that the governments are looking at doing that? Would you guys be involved in that decision making? How is that looking?
You know what the problem is, uh, the challenge we've got here, which is very different from Europe, is the government up until now, notwithstanding and I'm saying this with absolute sincerity, that there's a ton of work being done by PSOs like Alberta Equestrian Federation and EC as the NSO to get government's attention, which frankly up until now has been kind of dismal. They don't look at the horse industry the same way any of us do. In Europe, they do look at the horse industry the way you and I do. They see it as an economic contributor of significance. They see the economic benefits that come from the horse industry in their own economies. And as such, they perhaps provide more oversight, but at the same time can provide more supports. And so in Spain, and I don't know specifically what their legislation looks like, but I would guess that they have determined as the risk manager for the industry, as government, that riding would be a bad idea. I expect that that's probably in part driven by the whole social notion that riding in and of itself is probably a risky activity when compared to other sports or other physical activity. And they are probably trying to discourage everyone in Spain from participating in risky activity to keep their health system buoyed. In Alberta, I know that your curve, your premier has made it quite clear that things seem to be improving. I hope that's true. We hope it's true across the entire country or around the globe. I think it's a little premature personally, but time will tell. So again, it's about, is riding in and of itself a risk that people should be taking at the moment when consideration is given truly to the possibility of having to call a 911 ambulance to a site or to tie up a hospital bed. I did have a claim actually 2 weeks ago in exactly this context where a school barn couldn't manage the entire herd. They got this big straying, they got a bunch of boarders and stuff, so they had to get people out to help them manage these animals. So they allowed volunteers, people in the riding school that were proficient in theory, to come out and help them exercise some of the schoolies that just needed to get out. Well, predictable outcome. You know where this is going. It's a 45-year-old woman who's trying to help out and wants to get out of the house. So she comes up to the barn. She gets on the 27-year-old bomb-proof horse. She gets halfway around the arena the first time. The horse bucks like he's a 2-year-old. She ends up in the hospital with a concussion injury. And you kind of go, well, was that a preventable injury? Absolutely. Was it something that that frankly now has put a burden on the health system in her jurisdiction? Yeah, it has. And is this the time to be adding to that? And the answer is probably not. So I'm going to guess that Spain probably is a little ahead of us in that sense. Do I expect government here to ever say to us we can't ride or we should ride or anything to do with what we're doing? As much as AEF is trying, they're trying so hard to get ministers' attention and to find funding and to find financial assistance for our industry, and they are getting some things done. It's a long process, and I expect by the time this is all over, there's going to be some casualties, and that's regrettable. But it's not happening tomorrow.
Thanks, Jen. I'm going to mute your line again here. I had another question here. They asked, stables and facilities fall under the Stable Keep Act in Alberta. If we think they're not following this and providing proper care to the horses, do you know what other options there are? Can they be sued for not looking after the horses? If CapriCMW provides their insurance, would you cover them in this case?
Loaded question that I'm not going to answer, but I'll answer in general terms. Listen, a facility operator clearly has a legal responsibility to care for the animals that are on their property. That is absolutely true. The Health Welfare Acts for animals in Alberta, indeed in Canada, is quite specific to that. The caregivers or caretakers of animals have a legal responsibility to take care of the animal. If an owner of a horse could prove that the owner of the facility was negligent and did not provide that rudimentary care for the horse, could they be sued? I suppose they could be. And that's really all I can tell you. Whether or not we would respond or any particular insurer would respond would depend on 1,000 different considerations, which are too broad to sort of get into here, I think.
Okay, is there any other questions that we have that we can answer? Otherwise, Megan will do our wrap up here. We'll give it a minute or so. Okay, so we have one question here. Not specifically related to COVID-19, but I'm wondering why driving vehicles, carriages, and carts are not covered in the insurance area.
Sorry, why Carrie?
Yeah, so why driving vehicles like carriages and carts are not covered through insurance with AF Capri.
Okay. Okay, Aaron, I'm trying to understand the question. So is somebody asking whether or not the personal liability insurance associated with AEF, does it cover when I'm driving a horse?
What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to unmute this person. Jody, I'm going to unmute your line and you can clarify your question.
Yeah, no, I'll happily answer the question. I'm just not sure what it is.
No problem.
Yes.
Hi, Jody. I've unmuted you here. Can you clarify, please?
Sure, you bet. So I'm just wondering why, on a personal liability, or if people are driving their equine, carts, carriages, harnesses are not covered through our insurance.
I'm not sure I understand. Are you talking about whether or not it's the equipment itself that's insured, or are you talking about the liability associated with owning a horse that's being driven?
Right, the tax portion of that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's not a liability question at all. That's a property insurance question. So the TAC insurance provided through as an option to AF members, just it was never designed to facilitate the valuations associated with carts or carriages. It was always meant to simply address the typical tack and harness, frankly, that might be put on a horse, or equipment that's put on a horse that might be stored on or off a property. Carriages and other vehicles are considered a different sort of class of property insurance. They certainly can be insured. They're just not part of that optional insurance coverage.
They can be insured through Capri?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Or people's personal policy.
Or through their farm policy at home. It's just not part of that optional policy that we had designed however many years ago it was, Aaron. I don't know, was it 2009? So it's over 10 years now. Mm-hmm. But it was never designed to accommodate vehicles that might be drawn by a horse.
Okay.
Thank you, Jody. I'm going to mute your line again here. I have another question from Trisha. She says, I was told this morning by another professional that the health authority had allowed some lessons and training again, and some programs were running again. To your knowledge, is this not true?
Well, I'm not aware of that, but is it possible? I guess it is. And again, I think health officials are the best resource for any operator to have a consultation with respect to what might be or what might not be allowed. Again, we're trying our best to follow the sometimes inconsistencies that are coming from health authorities. I can't speak to the specifics of that because I don't know the details. But in general terms, again, it's not an insurance question. This is about whether or not the government allows for any business to be open at this particular time. And if they are allowed to be open, under what conditions can they be open? Again, the overriding theme here is to make sure the social distancing and other protocols are put in place to ensure that we're squishing COVID. I mean, that's the bottom line. As far as who to contact, Trish, I did see the second question there. On the Government of Alberta website, and Aaron, you're going to have to help me out here because I don't have it up in front of me. There is an email address. I want to say it's biz, at albertagov.ca, I think, but it's actually on the same web page of the essential business services that are listed. And somewhere on that page or pages that are associated with it, there is an email address where you can actually make an email inquiry, and you will get the health authorities to respond. Outside of that, it's about calling your regional district municipal office, asking to speak to the health authorities in that office. They all have one. There you go. BizConnect at Gov. So here's Norma. Put that back up. Did everybody see that?
Yeah, I can say it out loud if you want, Mike.
Yeah, do that, Megan. Sorry.
Okay, so it's Biz, so B-I-Z, Connect, C-O-N-N-E-C-T, so that's all one word, at gov, gov.ab.ca. So that's BizConnect at gov.ab.ca.
Yeah, and my understanding is that that email address is intended to be a funnel for business owners to ask specific questions about their business. But again, I was going to say at the municipal offices, they all have health officials there. They all have, so they got tax people, they got health people. Somebody has to come out and check the restaurants, and that's all local. So it can be done.
Okay, so we have another question here. Again, from Trisha, it says, last week you had referenced a coach who had received a letter from a health authority to permit her to do supervised sessions. Can you give more specifics about what health authority that
Well, again,
was?
it was a regional district. It was in Alberta. I can't remember where it was specifically, Trisha. I'm not trying to be evasive, but it was in her regional district. It wasn't in Edmonton, so it wasn't necessarily a provincial authority. Although I'm sure the province has dictated downstream to the various regional districts around the province what the directives are, and they're all trying to follow the same protocols. So again, I would direct you to whomever it is that you pay taxes to, your regional district. I would start there and say, who's the health authority in that office or in your jurisdiction, in your region, in your county, that is responsible for business operations or business operators? And who can you speak to specifically about getting an answer to a question about your business being open or not open, and what the restrictions are, if any, that are in place. That's what they're there for.
Excellent. If we don't have any other questions here, I think I'll let Megan wrap up. It doesn't appear that we have any pending questions.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just stop the screen share here. All right, so first we just want to say a big thank you to Mike for joining us today and going over your questions and some of the current insurance topics that people are wondering about. So we thank you for your time, Mike. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate CapriCMW as our official insurance partner. I also like to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come in and listen, and hopefully we're able to get some of your questions answered.